Hello, all you ghouls and goblins. Welcome to a special episode of The History Behind the Crime. So, how's it going? Are you getting ready for spooky season? Are you carving up pumpkins and hitting every spirit Halloween in town? I've bought at least $100 worth of candy for the office, and it's all gone. Looks like another Halloween shopping trip is in order. It's been kind of gloomy up here in the Pacific Northwest, but I've had a few afternoons of perfect autumn weather, and I want to be the stereotypical pumpkin spice latte girl with my boots and scarf and go find a pile of leaves to jump into. But I've tempered myself and bought only one new pair of boots that remind me of what I used to wear in 1995. Black combat boots with 2-inch platforms. Gosh, I miss the 90s. When I was a little girl, my mom would drop me off at my Aunt Emma's house when a babysitter was needed. I love my Aunt Emma. She always spoiled me when I stayed with her as a kid and as a teenager. And she let me and her two kids watch movies that we really shouldn't have been watching. Horror movies. Well, I should say monster movies. And I'm not just talking about the old Universal Studio monster movies either. The movie Gremlins did some serious damage to my young psyche, especially when someone thought it would be cute to give a 4-year-old kid a stuffed Gizmo doll. To this day, my mom still cracks up retelling the story about when I got Gizmo wet and came running down the hall screaming that we were all gonna die. I didn't even think twice about shoving Gizmo into the church's donation bin. It was the only toy I didn't mind parting with. Because of that event, I think Aunt Emma owes me a few $1,000s after all the therapy I had to pursue. But something messed me up a little bit more than mischievous gremlins from hell. I remember watching a slew of Stephen King movies that scared the bejesus out of me. One in particular haunted me until I was an adult. Silver Bullet. Yeah, okay, I watch it now, and I roll my eyes at the corny graphics, but the movie instilled in me a terrible fear of werewolves. Until I was about 30 and zombies bumped werewolves to second place on the list. By the way, if you want an excellent podcast about the history of zombies, you have to check out Throughline's episode simply entitled Zombies. I actually watched Silver Bullet a few nights ago while I was knitting up some Christmas gifts because you got to get an early start on that stuff. Anyway, I started laughing. I can't believe the movie scared me as a little girl. I mean, it is just so hokey. But you got to love Gary Busey. As this is a true crime podcast, I thought I would present some history on werewolves. But Aaron, you may be asking, what do werewolves have to do with true crime? Oh, so much. I used several sources for this episode, including Peter Vronsky's book, American Serial Killers, Ranker, because who doesn't love Ranker, the BS Historian, and the History Channel that, every now and again, actually presents history. Werewolf, or lycanthropy, origins can be found in several different cultures. In Greek mythology, the legend of Lycaon tells a tale of Lycaon, who served Zeus a meal made from the remains of a sacrificed boy. Totally disgusting, because the boy was well done rather than medium rare. Just kidding. Zeus punished Lycaon and turned him and Lycaon's sons into wolves, hence where we get the name lycanthropy. There's a lot of werewolf stories that can be found in ancient Greek literature. In fact, the Greeks had a love for werewolves as much as 1980s Hollywood did. A legend out of Arcadia tells the tale of chosen men transforming into wolves and joining a wolf pack for 9 years, where they, believe it or not, do not eat people. After 9 years, they transform back into humans and rejoin their town. Other legends tell of men using herbs and potions to voluntarily turn into wolves. The Greeks loved lycanthropy. But for the most part, the stories weren't that violent. Werewolves also make their appearance in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which actually predates even ancient Greece. Did anyone have to read that in high school? Somehow I managed to dodge it. Werewolves also show up in Nordic folklore, which is really no surprise based on the Nordic fascination with wolves. And in the late Middle Ages, we can also see werewolf lore popping up in other European areas, including England, France, Germany, and many Balkan states. If you listened to last season's episode about the Salem witch trials, you will remember that this was also the time when people began to fear witches as well. Europe during this time was very wary and enthralled with the supernatural. Anything bad that happened was blamed on the supernatural. Crops failed? Blame a witch. Your neighbor gets horrifically murdered? Blame a werewolf. But we'll get to that in a moment. Men were accused, put on trial, and executed for suspected lycanthropy in much the same way that women suffered from accusations of witchcraft. Werewolves, like witches, were believed to be in league with Satan. The accused were charged with cannibalism, killing livestock, and the abduction and murder of children. Almost unbelievably, all that was required for one to be convicted of lycanthropy was often the testimony of multiple neighbors and or local authorities. Many of those accused were beggars, hermits, and immigrants. So while the burning of witches reflects medieval society's primitive attitude towards women, the werewolf trials exposed xenophobia and suspicion of loners. During the 16th and 17th centuries, the French were obsessed with werewolves. Over the span of some 100 years, the French believed that over 30,000 individuals were killed by werewolves or people suspected of being werewolves. That's more people than modern-day serial killers are suspected of killing. In what is today modern Germany and Austria, werewolf folklore was rich. Between 1649 and 1679, at least 9 separate works about lycanthropy were printed, and people have blamed murders on werewolves as late as the 1940s. In Eastern European, the term for werewolf and vampire were used interchangeably because they were both feared equally. They were feared so much that more werewolves were burned at the stake than witches. But I don't want you to think that werewolf lore is strictly a European thing. You can find it in many different cultures in Africa, Asia, and even in North and South America. Many Native American groups have legends of shapeshifters, some working for good and some to be feared. The most famous of these legends is the Navajo skinwalker. While a skinwalker could take a shape of any animal, wolves were the most common. While in animal form, the skinwalker gave into its animal instinct and became vicious and unpredictable and killed on a whim. They were also clever and could lure people into the woods using the voice of loved ones, and were even known to put hexes on people. In white American culture, European immigrants brought their superstitions with them. They were most common in Canada and New Orleans, jam-packed with French immigrants, and down in Mexico, where Spanish settlers thrived. But what does any of this have to do with serial killers? Crime historians have theorized that the werewolf myth was used to explain gruesome and horrible murders. Murders so horrific that people could not believe a person could do something so heinous to another human. Today, we have no problem believing there are monster assholes out there willing to disembowel for fun and sexual gratification. But back in medieval and more modern times, few people could wrap their heads around sexual deviance and psychopathy. I think Peter Vronsky described it best in his book, American Serial Killers. In the postmodern past, serial killers were imagined to be supernatural monsters like vampires, werewolves, zombies, and ghouls. Even the two primary monsters of Western imagination, the undead vampire and the diabolically transformed werewolf, correspond roughly to the organized, disorganized classification of serial killers used by FBI behaviorists and profilers for decades until it was deprecated by the FBI in 2004. Like a vampire, the organized serial killer carefully chooses and stalks his victims, charms and seduces them, deceives and persuades them to invite them into their houses, as per vampire lore. He is sometimes attractive and takes on a seductive human form. He takes control of the victims' bodies and drains them of their blood in a form of necrophilic intercourse and cold lust. The victim is preserved. No mutilation. The violence is typically measured and coldly controlled. The disorganized serial killer blitz attacks with destructive brute force like a werewolf. His victim is chosen at random on impulse. There is no stalking or planning. These killers are repulsively animalistic. They kill and overkill, rape, mutilate, sometimes eat and destroy their victim in an unthinking hot rage and sexual lust. There is no preservation and control of the victim's body, only its destruction of physical consumption. In his research, Vronsky concluded that approximately 300 people were put to death in Europe between 1450 and 1650 for lycanthropy, or basically being a werewolf serial killer. He said those numbers were comparable to the prosecution of serial killers in the 19th and the first half of the 20th centuries. As a historian, I would argue that the number of people put to death in Europe for being a werewolf in those 200 years is closer to 1,000, and that's a conservative number. Vronsky used written accounts, but many records, especially in smaller, more superstitious areas, were lost or never kept in the first place. Now, I highly doubt all those people were serial killers. Most probably weren't. And they sure as hell weren't werewolves. I'm hoping. But it's highly likely some were disorganized serial killers. I also tripped over something interesting that gives the werewolf serial killer theory more weight. In some Eastern European werewolf folklore, an individual doesn't become a werewolf from a werewolf's bite, but it is destined to become a werewolf from childhood. Legends say children from broken and abusive homes were more likely to become werewolves, especially if they harm or kill animals. Today, we know that many serial offenders are abused as children and come from less than stable households, and harming and killing animals is a part of the McDonald triad: bedwetting, fire setting, and animal cruelty. Who would have thought medieval Hungarians were some of the first criminal profilers? On to some freaky werewolf stories that just seem to prove the theory. Oh, and by the way, I'm not even going to attempt to try to pronounce a lot of these names accurately. My French is so bad. So here we go. One of the most popular werewolf legends is the Beast of Gouvedon. Between 1764 and 1767, A large, wolf-like beast terrorized the people around Gouvernail, located in south-central France. I almost said south-central LA. Hey, we're gonna give California a break in this episode. Some people said the beast looked like a large dog or wolf. Some said it was a panther or a boar about the size of a horse. But in 1764, something began to attack lone victims wandering in the forest or tending livestock. The beast went for its victims' necks and heads, and there were so many attacks that villagers theorized it had to be several beasts hunting for victims. The priests declared the attacks were a punishment from God. King Louis XV, yeah, the one that got his head chopped off in the French Revolution, put out a reward for the capture or killing of the beast, and even sent out his own royal wolf hunters to hunt the beast or beasts down. In the fall of 1765, one of the king's hunters managed to kill a huge wolf that measured over 5 feet long and weighed more than 130 pounds. The wolf was so big that authorities declared it was the monster manhunter, and they stuffed the wolf and put it on display. But if you've ever watched Jaws, you know that it wasn't the beast the royal hunter killed. In December 1765, the beast killed again with a vengeance, taking down several more victims. In the summer of 1767, a hunter claimed to kill the beast once and for all with a silver bullet blessed by a priest. And this was the earliest written account that I could find of a silver bullet legend. When they cut the beast open, human remains were found in its stomach. Legend has it the beast killed over 100 people. The scary thing about the story is that it's true. Well, the murders at least. There is plenty of documentation written during the time of the grisly murders and stories of a werewolf slaughtering townsfolk. Today, we would have assumed it was a serial killer at work, but superstitions still ran rampant in rural France in the 18th century, and many people chalked up violence and death as the work of Satan. It wasn't until the mid-19th century when writers and historians theorized it was a man who committed the murders. A man dressed as a wolf. Still kind of scary as hell in my opinion. The following story is brought to you by Serial Killers Wiki. In 1598, an alarming amount of children went missing in Chalons, France. At the same time, there were numerous reports of a wolf-man hybrid devouring the corpses of children in the woods. Some living children even claimed that they were chased in the woods by a werewolf. Groups of hunters went into the woods to find the werewolf, but they were all unsuccessful. Authorities began to suspect a tailor with a shop on the edge of Chalons after people heard children crying in his shop. A posse then investigated the shop. In one room, they found barrels filled with the bones of up to 50 children. Then, in another room, they found human flesh, which was half eaten. In the backyard, they found the shallow graves of children. The owner of the shop, who was described as a reclusive, initially denied killing any children. However, the police were later able to torture a confession out of him. The tailor admitted to murdering around 50 children. Sometimes he would lure them to his shop, and other times he kidnapped them from the countryside. He then sexually assaulted them and tortured them using knives. He then murdered them by slitting their throats. After that, he dressed up and powdered the corpses of the children before eating them. Although the tailor denied being a werewolf, French authorities didn't believe him. While in custody, He would frequently have outbursts while frothing from the mouth. Although these were likely psychotic breaks, people at the time took this as evidence of him being a werewolf. At his trial, he was sentenced to burn at the stake, the typical punishment for witchcraft in France at the time. While he was being tied to the stake, he became angry and went into another one of his outbursts. Then he was burned to death. The crime was so gruesome and horrific that the court tried to destroy all records of the case, but some fragments managed to survive, except the name of the werewolf serial killer. This next story can be found on Occult World. In December 1521, 2 men were charged with witchcraft and cannibalism and brought before the Inquisitor General for the Diocese of Besançon, France. The accused were Pierre Burgot, called Peter the Great because of his size, and Michael Verdun. Partway into the trial, Burgot made a full confession. He said that 19 years earlier, a terrible storm scattered his flock of sheep. He enlisted the help of others and went in search of his lost sheep. 3 black horsemen rode up to him and inquired about his troubles. One of the men promised 3 things. Burgot would find his lost sheep, he would be protected and would never have any more trouble, and he would be given money. He would have all these things if he would pledge to serve only the man's master. Burgot agreed to meet the man again in 4 or 5 days. Burgot did find all his sheep, and he went to the meeting. He learned that the mysterious man was a servant of the devil. He swore allegiance to Satan and renounced Christianity. Burgot kissed the man's left hand, which he described as black and ice cold as that of a corpse. He later learned the man's name was Moisette. Burgot served the devil for 2 years, and his flock was protected. But Burgot soon tired of his life and resumed attending church. He was approached by Michael Verdun and was persuaded to renew his pact with the devil on the promise of getting money. Verdun took him into the woods where a ceremony was performed for transforming them into werewolves. Burgot described it as follows. In a wood near Chastel-Charnon, we met with many others whom I did not recognize. We danced, and each had his or her hand a green taper with a blue flame. Still under the delusion that I should obtain money, Michael persuaded me to move with the greatest celerity, and in order to do this, after I had stripped myself, he smeared me with a salve, and I believed myself to then be transformed into a wolf. I was at first somewhat horrified at my 4 wolf's feet and the fur with which I was covered all at once. But I found that I could now travel with the speed of the wind. This could not have taken place without the help of our powerful master, who was present during our excursion, though I did not perceive him till I had recovered my human form. Michael did the same as myself. When we had been 1 or 2 hours in the condition of metamorphosis, Michael smeared us again, and quick as a thought, we resumed our human forms. The salve was given us by our masters. To me, it was given by Moisette. To Michael, by his own master, Goumon. Burgot insisted that, unlike accounts given by other accused witches and werewolves, he felt no exhaustion after his shape-shifting adventures. He said that he and Verdun went out many times as wolves. On one occasion, Burgot said he seized a boy of about 6 or 7 years, intending to tear him to pieces and eat him. The boy screamed so loudly that Burgot was forced to retreat to his clothes and smear himself with the ointment in order to resume his human shape so that he could escape undetected. On another occasion, he and Verdun attacked and tore to pieces a woman who was gathering peas. They killed a man who attempted to rescue her. They attacked, killed, and ate a girl of 4, leaving only one arm. Verdun thought the flesh to be especially delicious. They strangled another girl and drank her blood. In his human form, Burgot attacked a girl of 9 who was weeding her garden. She begged for her life, but he snapped her neck, killing her. He attacked a goat and bit it in the throat and then killed it with a knife. Burgot told the Inquisitor that he had to be naked in order to make the transformation into a wolf, but Verdun could do it with his clothes on. Burgot could not explain what happened to his wolf hair when he shapeshifted back into human form. It just seemed to vanish. Verdun corroborated all of Burgot's statements. They were convicted and burned at the stake. Let's move a little farther east to Germany. In the late 1500s, the city of Bedburg, Germany was terrorized by a wolf-like creature. Both townspeople and livestock were being killed, and children were disappearing. Citizens were terrified, but could do nothing to stop the mysterious killer. A year later, a group of men were out hunting for the wolf. They spotted the animal and moved in for the capture, but when they got closer, they realized it was a man, Peter Stump. He was a farmer who lived just outside the city. Stump was threatened with torture and confessed to killing 1 man, 2 pregnant women, and 13 children. He said that at the age of 12, he entered into a pact with the devil, who gave him a magical belt that would transform him into a werewolf. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. His mistress and his daughter, whom he was accused of having an incestuous relationship with, were also sentenced to death as a way to make sure they killed all the evil in his family. Stump's execution was brutal. He was stretched on a wheel, his limbs were broken with an axe, and he was beheaded. His daughter and his mistress were burned at the stake. Let's move on to Spain and something a little bit more modern. Not only was Manuel Blanco Roma Santa a self-proclaimed werewolf, he was also believed to be Spain's first serial killer. He was born in 1809, and for the first few years of his life, he was raised as a girl. Doctors didn't discover that he was a male until he was 6 years old, which makes me think he was super messed up because of that. After becoming a widower in 1833, he started working as a travel guide in Spain and Portugal. In 1844, he was suspected of killing the constable of Leon after the official had tried to collect a debt. Roma Santa fled the country and became a fugitive, hiding in a small village and using a fake name. His murder count only grew after that. Several of the women who had hired him disappeared along with their children, and he covered up their absences by writing letters to their families explaining that they had moved. Finally, the other villagers caught on. They accused him of killing people and making soap out of their fat. Ew. At his trial, Roma Santa claimed that he had been cursed to transform into a wolf. In his animal form, he would go on a 5-day killing spree before returning to his human body. The court took his claim seriously and asked him to prove it by turning into a wolf before their eyes. But he explained that the curse lasted for 13 years and had just expired the previous week. Damn the luck. He was acquitted for some of the murders after it was proven that a few of the victims had died in real wolf attacks. But he was convicted on 9 charges and sentenced to death. Queen Isabella commuted his execution because a doctor hoped to treat his lycanthropy, but he died in prison a few months later. let's move on to the United States. Albert Fish is one of the most notorious serial killers in history, also known as the Brooklyn Vampire, the Boogeyman, and the Werewolf of Wisteria. Before he became a full-blown murderer and cannibal, he reportedly liked to eat raw meat during every full moon. Later, he began preying on children. He met one of his victims, Grace Budd, in 1928 after responding to an employment ad that Grace's brother had placed in the paper. He went to their apartment with the intention of offering the boy a job, luring him away, and killing him. But he changed his mind when he saw Grace. He said he'd love to take her to his niece's birthday party, and her parents agreed to let her go with Fish. They never saw Grace again. Years later, her family received a mysterious letter detailing how the writer had killed Grace and consumed her flesh. The letter was traced back to Fish, and he was arrested. The exact number of his victims is unknown, but he confessed to over 100. Fish was executed in the electric chair in 1936. And finally, in 2013, a California man, named Mark Andrews used a rifle to kill his neighbor, Colleen Barga Milbury. He tried to claim insanity during the trial, saying he was a werewolf, that he was married to a she-wolf, and that he had lived through the medieval times. He told a psychologist that he first transformed into a werewolf when he was 3 years old. He also said that he believed that his neighbor was a vampire who was stealing his dreams, perhaps continuing to lay the tracks for an insanity defense. However, there was evidence that he had planned the crime and tried to avoid being caught. He was even interviewed by a TV reporter and feigned shock at his neighbor's death. Andrews was convicted of murder in 2015 and sentenced to 50 years in jail. Werewolves. Magical beings that transform into snarling, ferocious monsters? Or humans who give in to their psychopathic urges and slaughter innocent people? The historian and cop in me is convinced without a doubt that superstitious and overtly religious people of earlier times were much more comfortable believing horrific murders were the work of Satan rather than the people that they lived next door to. Even today, we continue to label serial killers as monsters because part of us cannot comprehend that the human psyche is capable of such malevolence. While the common sense side of me, as small as that can be, dismisses the idea of real werewolves, there's the other part of me that always wonders, what if? I mean, there has to be something to all these werewolf myths and legends, right? I mean, aside from the logical things like superstition and real medical conditions like hypertrichosis, which causes excessive body hair. What if that creepy gypsy woman in The Wolfman had it right, and a person can transform into a wolf-like beast under the full moon? Highly implausible. But it's the first thought I have when the moon is full and I can hear scratching at my window. Yeah, I know. It's probably the wind blowing through the bush outside my window. But what if it's not? What if it's that childhood fear finally coming to get me? I don't know about you guys, but an irrational part of me fears the werewolf more than I fear serial killers. And that's the part that keeps me up at night. That part of me that transforms that pile of clothes in the corner into a hairy beast with long claws. And that's the reason why I will be skipping my annual The Howling Marathon this year. Thank you very much. What are you guys doing for Halloween? Anyone going to a party? My mom and I used to have awesome Halloween parties before I moved from Oklahoma. Who's staying at home and handing out candy? Who's taking their own little ghouls and goblins trick-or-treating? Who's turning off the porch light and watching scary movies? Whatever you're doing, I hope you stay safe but have an awesome time. I am staying in this year and watching the original Exorcist. Every Halloween, I try to watch a classic original. Last year was Halloween, a big bowl of popcorn, and 2 trick-or-treaters, which actually surprised me because I live in an apartment. I just happened to have some candy available. I really do hope you all have a spooky Halloween and can capture some of that magic from your childhood. Have fun, be safe, and do me a favor. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Happy Halloween!